that is not unlike what Pascal has in mind by talking of intuitive knowledge. And a kind of intuitive knowledge which is a direct personal awareness. Direct personal awareness of what? Well, it applies in physics in regards to space. It's a matter of intuitive awareness that space is three-dimensional. Religious faith, belief in God, is a kind of intuitive awareness of the divine being. This intuition provides kinds of natural beliefs which are spontaneous on our part, not the result of chains of argument or inference. And maybe you are familiar with his classic way of putting it. The heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. You familiar with that quotation? The heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. Now, I've asked myself what he means by the heart, as distinct from the mind, you see. And in our popular vocabulary, I think going back to the 18th century, the heart is usually spoken of as the seat of emotions. Now, I don't think that that is Pascal's use of the term. I think Pascal uses the term the heart more in the biblical sense, where it is the unifying core of the whole personality. In other words, he sees reason as involving only part of a person's God-given faculties. He sees intuition, the kind of thing the heart knows, as involving the whole of the personality in the very depth of its being, by virtue of its inner nature. So that it is by virtue of our nature as physical beings that we're aware of the three-dimensionality of space. It's by virtue of the fact that we are at heart religious beings in the image of God, that faith in God, belief in God is a spontaneous sort of response of the person to the world in which God has put us. So the heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. Pascal stands in that regard as a critic of the kind of rationalism that is going to develop for the Enlightenment, an early critic of it. And it's sometimes said that the next time you get anybody like that, it's Soren Kierkegaard. Pascal and Kierkegaard, two interesting types. There is one other side to Pascal, of course, Pascal's wager, where in terms of the existence of God, he proposes that it pays to wager. It's an interesting sort of consequential thing. The prudent thing is to believe. It's as if he's picking up on the right reason notion all over again. You see, because in that sense, right reason would go something like this. Either God exists or he does not exist. If he does exist and you believe it, you have everything to gain. If he does not exist but you believe he does, you have nothing to lose. If he does not exist and if he does exist and you do not believe it, you have everything to lose. So the gain is all on wagering that God exists. That's the prudent thing to do. And so that famous Pascal's wager, you see, is assessing, as it were, probabilities. I read somewhere that he was very interested in the theory of probability because he had watched his friends gambling. And it was the theory of chances that he saw illustrated in the chances they took that egged him on in that direction. So, okay, Pascal then, in contrast to Descartes. Now, questions, comments at that juncture? David?
So Pascal was really developed like
A whole philosophy?
Yeah.
No, he's not a philosopher. In the sense that he's not developing philosophical theory, philosophical arguments. On the other hand, while he has a negative view of the possibility of effective arguments and theories, he's very much alert to logic, you see. The limitations of deductive logic, which was getting a lot of criticism ever since Duns Scotus, and the possibilities of inductive logic. You see, probability theory. So in that sense, his contribution is much more in regards to logic. He invented what I understand is the first calculating machine. And that's why his name has been given to computers, Pascal. This was the mathematician at work. He even worked out a public transportation plan, I think it was, for the city of Paris. He was interested in city planning and all that sort of thing. But this is the mathematical mind at work in those things. Okay, any other comments, questions? Yeah.
I have a question on Descartes.
Okay.
I didn't ask earlier. I just wondered if you could revamp what right reason is and as it means to change what we can't. I had that written down,
Yeah.
but I don't really understand.
Yeah.
What can we change?
Yeah.
Right.
There are two kinds of things we can change. One kind much more effectively than the other. We are most effective in changing our own emotions, changing our passions. And we do that by choosing to set before ourselves clear ideas about consequences that might follow from giving such passions free rein. That clear perception of consequences is likely to turn what was desire to do that into a disinclination to do it. You see? So we can modify our own passions. The thing we cannot change as effectively is the circumstances of our lives, external things. We can do that sometimes, in some particulars, but obviously we're not as effective there. So then, the good life, the life that's more bearable, is one in which we are free because of our clarity of mind to change the things that we can and to gain, to win a contentment of mind in the face of things we cannot change.
So it's not a purely mechanical type body. If we didn't have the mind, if we did not have right reason, our bodies would still go on completely mechanical.
Yes, yes.
But we can have some control over our
And this is what makes the human animal differ from others.
And this is what makes you more of a rationalist.
Yes, yes. Yeah, although keep in mind that the difference between rationalism and empiricism is in terms of the sources of knowledge. You see, he's a rationalist in that regard. The term rationalism has at least 3 different meanings. Have we talked about that before?
I'm sure we have.
Well, let's refresh our minds. At least three different meanings. The first is rationalism over against empiricism, which has to do purely and simply with the sources of our knowledge. The empiricist claims that all knowledge comes ultimately from experience. Now, what you do thereafter may be exactly the same as Descartes did. In fact, for Locke it is. Locke wants to get empirical premises from which to do his deductive building. Descartes has a priori premises from which he does his deductive building. You know, the difference between them is on the sources of the premises, the ultimate sources of knowledge, a priori or empirical. So that's one kind of rationalism, that which distinguishes Descartes from empiricists like John Locke. The second kind of rationalism stands over against what's called fideism. And I suppose that did Pascal not give attention to things like historical evidences, he would sound like a fideist. Because a fideist is one who, well, simply believes, for whom belief is unrelated to evidence or argument. Whereas a rationalist is one for whom belief in very large measure depends on evidence or argument. Rationalist versus fideist. Fideist, yeah. It's a term that's, obviously it's drawn from the term fides, faith. But it's a term that's used all the time in contemporary philosophy of religion, epistemology, so forth. Fideism as against rationalism. It's often contrasted with foundationalism or evidentialism. Fideism. Yeah, so to say that Descartes is in that sense is a rationalist is simply saying he's a foundationalist. Now the third sense of rationalism has to do with this kind of moral psychology that we've come across now in Descartes. That reason is able to rule in the moral life. That the clarity of ideas, the light of reason in that sense, can dispel certain emotions. The power of reason over emotion, or reason over the will. That's taken to be rationalism. If it were the other way around with the will, it would be voluntarism. So this is rationalism over against voluntarism. Or, in as much as it has to do with feelings and emotions, I suppose you could say rationalism over against romanticism. Yeah. Rationalism over against romanticism. Well, Descartes' a rationalist in all three senses. He's a rationalist, not an empiricist.